Welcome back to Walking the London Road, the Oxfordunited podcast. This is going to be one that I'm sure many rival fans are going to be tuning into. This is going to be the definitive therapy episode because, folks, after probably the worst first half display of the season, Oxford United are all but confirmed to be relegated back to League One after 2 seasons back in the second tier of British football. Before we get too far into it, Connor, I'll ask the civilised question first. You did something better with your weekend of travelling to Derbyshire. What'd you get up to?
I went and watched a football game in Derbyshire in a pub, and I thought that the worst display of the weekend would be £6.50 on the card machine for a pint of Murphy's. But then I sat down in front of a TV and watched what I saw on the television.
Now, before we get into things, we both agreed we need to do this. Drink check. What we having tonight then, sir?
Do you know what? I actually haven't got any lager, so we'll just say that this is just a straight pint of vodka in a Guinness glass.
One of the Asahis. So,
lovely stuff.
Christ almighty. Yeah. So the situation is that obviously Oxford are, with 3 games to go, we're 5 points inside the relegation zone. And yes, we've got a game in hand on Blackburn, and obviously West Brom have got potentially an impending points deduction, I should say. But the fact that we're relying on points deductions to maybe survive is an indictment on this season, I think. And, you know, I think if West Brom were to get a significant points deduction and drop them into the bottom 3, I think that would be a massive, massive let-off because Oxford United have been the 3rd worst team in the division this season.
It would be a damning, first of all, it would be a damning indictment on the EFL that if that happened, say the season finished and there was a points deduction of that significance or for the sake of £1 million. And if there was ever a scenario where we were pushed out of the relegation zone, I said to my old man the other day, obviously I'd be happy, but the emotion that I would feel would not be anywhere near as compared to, say, last season when it was decided through footballing activities and on the football pitch. And that's the same for any fan. I think if they were in our position or even in West Brom's position, they wouldn't want to achieve safety or achieve a promotion or achieve a championship that way through legalities and lawyers and league competition administration. But you're absolutely right. We have been, you know what, Sam? We've probably been the 2nd worst team this season. I'm not Sheffield Wednesday. I think you can just knock off because they were getting relegated before the season even began. So
True.
we've been the 2nd worst team behind Leicester.
Yep, 100%. Who are also pretty much confirmed to be down. They are 8 points inside the drop. So, I'm trying to think where to go next. I'll start by saying a massive thank you for the continued support you guys have showed on the podcast this season. It's been incredible, even when we've been shit on the pitch. Another like, comment, and subscribe spree from yourselves would be massively appreciated. And of course, you'd boost our spirits a little bit if you follow us both on Twitter at our tags you can see on screen. Bloomfield went with an unchanged 11 at Pride Park, which I think we talked about last week was likely, the strongest side we could put out, and that side puts in, that side that has put in obviously great performances against Watford. Good majority of the second half against Portsmouth, put in the stinkiest of first halves against Derby.
Yeah, just when you thought that stinky first half against Portsmouth couldn't be topped against 10 men, an even worse first half of football is trotted out. It was painful, Sam. Watching it on the television. I'm not being in the stands. It must have been far worse. It was tough. Not only some of the decision making from ourselves, but also the fact that we literally have our own players who are running into each other, taking too many touches, not keeping your heads up, not making the right decisions, the right plays at the right time. And then you add that on top of just how far, strong and physical Derby were. It was embarrassing almost. And you thought, unfortunately, we are a League One team. there have been commentators in other podcasts saying that our squad just isn't good enough, and I've tried to push back as much as I could, but it showed yesterday, unfortunately.
100%. Derby dominated for the most part in that first half before the goal, and I think it was such an unforced error. One of the most unforgivable aspects of that game is that Derby's goal comes from our throw-in, and that, if you can see from your own set piece, that's, like I said, nigh unforgivable for that playing squad. Also, hesitations from Brodie Spencer in making the challenge. I would question why we've only got one man back for a set piece so early on in a game like that. But it's something we did throughout the game, was have just one man back covering. Jamie Cumming didn't cover himself in glory throughout the that game with his long distribution, the return of Jamie's long distribution troubles, which we talked about at length on the podcast. But that was, typical. I think it seemed very much like a typical kind of goal you'd see from a side fighting for their lives, concede against a side that are, chasing the top half of the table.
Yeah, it was one of those. I'm not sure if you've seen the goal that Leicester conceded to Swansea, almost similar, but given that this was a throw-in, not a corner kick, and Leicester got ridiculed, and rightly we got ridiculed as well from having a throw-in that far up the pitch, and conceding like we did in a 3-on-1 situation. And overall, Sam, I think a 1-0 loss actually flattered us a little bit, because it should have been far more, if we're absolutely honest.
100%. So, as you can tell, viewers, we're not going to spend an awful lot of time on this Derby game because it was just that shit. We have two enormous chances in that second half. The first coming through Marspert Harris, who tries to go around Zeta Strong, mucks it all up.
Should have been slung off at half-time, by the way.
Yeah, 100% should have been. I think we mentioned it in the group chat that obviously when he came in, he was brilliant. He was a revelation. But whether it's he's played just too many minutes, whatever, he's looked far off the standards for, in recent games. And then the other one is Yunus Konak, who I thought was one of the reasons that we weren't even further down, because I thought Konak had in isolation a pretty decent game, but nicks the ball, as he so often does in the opposition's half, charges forward and decides to go alone, and despite having one man to his left and one man to his right, blaze it over the bar. And that's when I knew we're not getting back into this game. I think we mentioned last week that a certain mate of mine put a bet on Konak to get a shot on target because it had such high odds. That's definitely not the situation where I wanted Konak to strike that ball.
No, I'm sure that those odds for either Tuesday or Saturday have just got a lot higher as well, given against Portsmouth went about 30 miles over the bar, and then at Derby went about 60 miles over the bar.
So that's the Derby game out of the way.
Yep.
Let's talk about the rest of the season, because we discussed it just before we began rolling that this is the pod where we want to talk about why we're in this situation, look back on the season, because at least that means we can enjoy ourselves for the remaining 3 games we've got in the second tier of English football for at least the next season. So, also I should just mention for the fact fans out there that this is yet another game of football that Sam Allison has refereed that Oxford United have not won this season. Not blaming Sam Allison. We were shocking, like I said, worst first half of the season. There was some very questionable decision from Allison. Surprise, surprise. But we should ask him not to ref our games, not just because he's a scum, but because we always lose when he refs us. But let's look at the season as a whole, because let's go all the way back to August. We talked about it at the time that Indonesia pre-season tour was it was going to be a test for everyone, but I don't think I think we underestimated at the time just how much that's affected our campaign.
Yeah, I think that in hindsight, a lot of fans would still be okay with us doing it. I mean, I would be anyway. However, it was just such a quick turnaround from announcing it that we're going, and I guess that was even sprung on to Rowett and the players. It'd been reported in Indonesia for a fair few months, so us fans in the UK knew that it was happening, but we were just waiting for that official line, and it was like that the club announced it. Oh yeah, we're going in about 10 days, about 7 to 10 days. And it just seemed like there was very little organization. It seemed like that there was, I'm just speculating here, it seemed like from the outside that maybe there hadn't been proper due diligence rather in the teams that were playing, the conditions of the pitches, which was a massive factor, the weather conditions that would be out there because it was at points monsoon season and the heat and humidity, the travel that it would take out. These, you could expect these maybe out of Premier League players, but they're not. They're League One sprinkled with a couple of Championship players, lower end Championship players. And, we went there and we suffered some, quite bad injuries, main one being Romney, which is who I'm absolutely convinced that is the entire reason of the tour, to promote him as our supposedly marquee signing over there. And we come back and we get straight back into pre-season, and you could tell straight away from the first game of the season, or at the start of August against Portsmouth, you could tell straight away that the pre-season has had some sort of effect on the team. And we're going to get onto other things that happened in the summer, or therefore lack of, and everything just come into an amalgamation that summer of an absolute honking pot of shit.
100%. I think the club massively underestimated how much work Premier League clubs have to do when they come back from these overseas tours to make up for almost the time you've lost. Because like you say, I'm all for those players going out there. I'm all for those players, getting that experience of a new culture of, to a certain degree, it's almost like warm weather training, like the players have done before in Spain.
Yep.
But like you say, the pitches were poor standard, like say monsoon season in Indonesia and monsoon-like conditions in Indonesia. And if it had been maybe, you could probably say 2 games, organised 2 friendlies, fine. Yeah. But also the distance that the boys travelled between the first pre-season game against the All-Stars and then the second against whoever it was, I can't remember.
Going from Jakarta to Bandung, they had to cross an island, I think, didn't they? They literally had to go to another island on Indonesia. Like, even that little bit, it's going to take more out of you.
Yeah. And I think they moved training camps, I think, like after 1 game of that pre-season tour. I don't think, like you say, it was clearly rushed logistically, and this is the mental thing about that, and I think we talked about it at the time, that we'd been hearing that an Indonesia tour was being planned from back in March of 2025, but it's only a couple of weeks before they go out there that it gets officially announced, which is just baffling. So that happens. Obviously, we all know that the one summer edition we made was Brian de Kersmacher at that point. He came in. Rowett thought he was going to get a second body, which I'm led to believe was Callum O'Dowda, but then O'Dowda decided to go off to Hungary and play European football.
Can't blame
Fez.
And he's about to win a league title today, if not already.
So, I'm not saying that, I'm not blaming the club for that, but also maybe have a backup plan. So Rowett has the 2 players that he wanted to bring in before the players jetted off, because like we said, it's, if it was, his hometown club against a side playing European football, as much as he might love us, he still is going to choose the, because he's still in his early 30s, players are playing till their late 30s at this point in their career. So, maybe approaching when he's 34, 35 maybe, but
I'm sure
not
he's getting a
30, 31.
healthy. I'm sure he's getting a healthy wedge as well. You know.
Yeah, 100%. So that was, that was the transfer activity leading into, obvious, as you mentioned, Ole Romane got injured on that Indonesia tour. I think there was a couple of other knocks that occurred, and overall, I mean, I'm less critical of our summer business than you are. I think after, if I remember rightly, after that summer window, you were at that point already calling for Ed Waldron's head, or at least his job, because of some of the decisions that were made and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, we signed Brody Spencer after that. Then Luke Harris is the first loan deal. Then I think, is it Ben Davies? I think
Yeah, Ben
I'm just
Davies.
trying to
He
retread
came
all
in.
the signs we made.
He came in late August, I think, because Kieran Brown was out and we needed a left-sided centre half. But yeah, the only two signings that I may give that I'll give Waldron credit for is De Maka and Brody Spencer as well. But it was an absolute shambles of a summer recruitment, I have to say. It was when eventually when the season's up and more podcasts like this do their deep dive, unfortunately, I think that Waldron, it's going to be a mix between Waldron possibly and the board, but mainly the finger is going to get pointed at Waldron because it hasn't just been the last summer transfer window. I think of some of the signings in January and then the summer before that. I know that we had our back and forth in the group chat, and I thought we were both making good points. He has brought in some players, as I say, like Spencer, De Maka, also managing to bring back in Stan Mills and Lancashire, but there's been some others which have just been absolute honkers and have been absolutely just almost financial mismanagement if some of the wages and some of the fees that we've paid are to be believed, and they just haven't lived up to that expectation whatsoever.
I mean, we can look at that now. Like I said, this is, I think, the episode where we want to get all of it out. So just to kind of round things off, the other incomings we saw were, just going off from memory, Nick Prelic, obviously on loan from Cagliari with an option. Philip Krastev was the deadline day signing. We also brought in Will Lancashire, obviously, on loan from Spurs. And I think that might have been it from memory. Let me just go back and check my notes, make sure I've not missed anyone. Yes, that was it for the summer recruits. So of that summer batch, like you say, De Maka is a tick. Although obviously major injury, and although his social media statement suggested otherwise, I am concerned we might not see him ever again in Oxfordshire. Brody Spencer, obviously came in from Huddersfield. Those were our only two permanent deals of the window. Luke Harris came in on loan from Fulham, who lasted 6 months, got little game time, and is now playing for Wickham. Nick Prelic, I thought he's had some very bright showings, but obviously I think it was hernia is what he'd done, and got I think an illness recently, which means he's not been involved, so that's kind of taken him out of consideration. Ben Davies has been massively unlucky, I think. Obviously, brought in to replace Kieran Brown after Kieran Brown's injury was going to take longer to heal from than expected. And then when Brown is back, Davis gets injured and has really struggled. I mean, I'm trying to think, the last time we saw him might have been before Bloomfield took over. I'm genuinely trying to remember when his last game was.
Exactly, yeah. As I said, I even forgot that he was at the club, Sam. It's been that long.
And then obviously Philip Krastev, who I can't remember if I mentioned it on this podcast, but I've mentioned it to yourself and a couple of others in person recently, that the thing with Philip Krastev is, I thought, and I still think, as a footballer, I think he's obviously massively talented. And I think he would suit a team that are playing like top half of the table, I think. But not for the kind of situation we're currently we're currently dealing with. And then obviously the smash hit of that summer recruitment was Will Lancashire, brought in, and I think is on 11 goals in all comps. Has been a brilliant addition, and the lone player that I've fallen in love with the most since while they've been at the club. So we'll break up the summer and January recruitment. Let's talk about the summer recruitment, because I think this is where you've got the most issues. And I think we both said at the time that this is why the January recruitment had to be so drastic's the wrong word, but there had to be so many bodies brought in and of the quality that we did go require.
Yeah, it did show in January, I thought, but we'll get there when we do. But yeah, try and go through them methodically. So yeah, as I said, Ben Davies forgot he was at the club. I totally agree with you. Very, very unlucky. Can't even remember the last game he played in. Krastev, unfortunately for him, he sold me a dream when the announcement video was him scoring 2 past PSV Eindhoven. And I thought, hello, we've got a League One Messi on our hands, the Bulgarian Messi. But remember, he came on against who was it? First time I saw him, I think it was Bristol City away, and you thought, oh, there's a bit of a player, and then he just never really showed up again. Luke Harris got his 1 goal. Who was that against? It was in a 1-1 draw, I believe. What's that?
Borough.
Yeah, against Borough. Never saw him again. And unfortunately for the lads, he is now at Wickham, which I'm very, very sorry for that, Luke. But yeah, these weren't names like when you compare them to some of the summer business that we did the window before, which, don't get me wrong, I do have my issues with, but it was just very underwhelming compared to the summer before, especially when, I don't know why more people haven't picked up on this, when our chief executive, Tim Williams, when he said, the squad has proven that they can be competitive in the championship. There is a small amount of money. Boss, did you not see the teams that were coming up? Charlton, the smallest of them, are slinging around £10 million like it's running out of fashion. And I get that they're able to spend more because they own their own stadium and they're able to generate their own revenue. But that didn't give me a lot of confidence whatsoever when he said, the question was asked by Jerome Sale about the funds for the window when they were in Indonesia, and Tim Williams seemed to just kind of bat it off.
Yeah, obviously you've spoken heavily about your issues with Tim Williams. Just to kind of correct us, so I've just double checking. Ben Davies actually started 2 games under Bloomfield. He started the win against Leicester and started the loss against Birmingham on the 31st of January. That was his last game in an Oxford United shirt. And he was on the bench for the Sheffield United, Coventry and Norwich games. We haven't seen him since. I've not heard of any injury issues with Ben Davies, but given that has taken up the majority of his time at the football club, it wouldn't be a massive jump to say he's probably had another significant knock that's kind of set him back. And also, it should be mentioned, he's on a fair whack of wage. I think if you include obviously the loan signings, I think Ben Davies will be our highest paid player. Now, I've not been told kind of what percentage of his Rangers wage we're paying, but I think his Rangers wage is, I think, just under 25k.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was going to say, if he's at Rangers, he's more likely on a decent wedge. And at that time, Sam, we were desperate. We were desperate for a left-sided centre half, and they were desperate to get rid of him. So I wouldn't be surprised if we were paying a fair whack. So what if it's 25 grand? If 25 grand, you pay 10, 20, even like 25%. Say you're paying, that's $7.5 grand. If you go up to 30, that's
that's above what Brannigan and Hellick are on. So I think we both agreed, and obviously with Will as well, that the January recruitment was a lot stronger. Again, I'll run through in just a second, but this definitely came across as this is what the summer recruitment should have been. So, pardon me. Obviously, we've got Jamie Donnelly brought in just before the MK game. Obviously plays in that game and gets injured. Miles Harris also signed before that game and plays the full, other than obviously the 50 minutes that Donnelly played. I think he played, the entire game and even took a pen. So, like I said, Miles Harris comes in on a free transfer. This is when we're thinking, this is when we're kind of starting to do business, because we've been linked with Donnelly for a little bit. We saw what he'd done on loan at Leyton Orient with Jack Curry last season, and we're thinking, okay, it's a good little signing. But Harris, the structuring of that deal, super interesting. Obviously, 6 months, 6 month loan from 6 month up. His contract was terminated at Brentford, and he signs on a 6 month contract. Then Yunus Konak, who I think I noted at the time, I've been told that the deal to sign him was in the works before Gary Rowett was sacked, but another very quality player, and we've seen that in recent games. First loan in England, but I think we can both agree he's done very, very well.
Yeah.
Jane McDonnell, highly touted by Mansfield fans and also Forest fans. Before, obviously, he was recalled from his loan at Mansfield and signed for about £1 million. Then we start to get into, again, some of the experimental deals, I'll put it. John Jin Woo signed from Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors. We spoke about at the time. Obviously, he's come off the back of a 20-goal assist season, helping the side to win the double, and he seemed like the kind of direct attacker that we needed, and he's struggled for minutes. Partly, I think it's kind of adapting to life in British football, which, in my view, is why maybe some of these deals from leagues like the South Korean league should be done in summer to give them time to adapt. Obviously, it's easier said than done because their club won't want to let them go mid-campaign. But that's a debate I'm sure we could have till the cows come home. Chris Makoso brought in from Luton, great start. Has faded off in recent games, and then the deadline day duo of Ruben Ruskin and Adomo Amaku. Just quickly touching on the Derby game, I thought Amaku and Jin Woo had okay games. It was one of Amaku's decent appearances, much like Stoke, but he's not pulled up trees. Ruskin had a good appearance against Coventry and has struggled since then. Like I said, I think at the time we both agreed that January was a good window, but it was very much making up for what had to be done and what wasn't done in summer.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot more, I'd say it was a lot more aggressive than it was in the summer, which was good to see. And it was good to see that we had an owner that was an owner in Eric Tohier who was definitely willing to put his hand in his pocket and was willing to get us out of the situation that we're in. So, and he's been spending as much as he can. So, we have to say that, that the intent is there, just how that money was spent. And overall, as you say, it was a lot better. It was you could almost argue that it was complete night and day. If you look at the difference that past January, the difference that these players who signed in January have made compared to what we had from the summer, and from the summer to through to January. Yeah, I'm just a little bit lost for words, if I'm honest, because it's just some of the signings that we've made, as I keep saying, with those £1 million plus. I think of Sariki Dembele when he came in, and then we had Romney, and then we've also had Amaku and Jin Woo. I do feel a little bit sorry for Jin Woo in that I don't really think he's really been given that much of an opportunity. I would like to have seen him a bit more, especially over the past few games. Mm-hmm. And Amaku as well. I think there's definitely a player in there, but he's kind of reminding me a little bit of, unfortunately, of who was the lad that we had from Crystal Palace?
Malcolm
Abue. That's it. Not in his.
But that's harsh. Amaku's been shaky, but Abue had we've heard of all the stuff that kind of has happened behind the scenes with Abuy and his kind of, other than, I think he might have played against Colchester in the cup. He was kind of invisible in his other games. At least, Mako has had okay games in his time with the club so far.
You didn't let me finish, Sam. You didn't let me finish. No, I was going to say, it reminds me in the sense of not what's anything that's going on in his personal life, but in the fact that he seems to be struggling a little bit. And I thought that with Abuy, there were little glimpses, but it just didn't work out for one reason or another. And I'm kind of seeing the same with Amaku. As I said, you can see that there's a player in there, but sometimes I get very frustrated at his decision making and his inability to track back. I remember, what game was it? I think it might have been Hull, where he came on, and you could see that, like, when he wants it. Like, he's physical, he's aggressive, but yeah, I have slight concerns about how that lad is going to be, because I imagine that it will be there in our League One squad because we spent that amount of money on him. We've given that length of contract. I just hope that he sees it, that it's a place where he can rebuild if it's in League One and put himself on the pedestal.
So those are the two windows. Let's also note that obviously those are two windows across two separate managers. And I think that's another point, is that obviously Waldron is, he's doing the negotiations and all that kind of thing. But I think these two windows reiterate the fact, and we spoke about it in the week, that, and I said it at the time, not to blow my own trumpet, but I said it at the time, that Gary Rowett's style of play is not the one you want to start a campaign. And we both agreed that Rowett should have gone before he did. I'm just looking back at kind of the games under Gary Rowett. I think maybe the I can't say Swansea, because Swansea was after a run of 3 games unbeaten, but I think the Swansea game, because obviously we were both there, it was such an abject performance that there was, had to be serious questions. Maybe if he'd gone, maybe after the Preston game, but that's only a game earlier. And obviously this also ties into the club being quicker in actually appointing Matt Bloomfield.
It was after the Norwich game for me, Sam, and the saving grace that Rowett had was that Philip Krastev scored a 96-minute equaliser. Otherwise, I think there would have been a lot more cause for him to go. And I'm sure that you'll remember after that game, went on the pod and on the chat, I said, that's it. I've backed him as much as I can, but I'm done. Just that abject performance of that night, and especially considering, as I think at that point, Norwich had lost about 6 or 7 on the bounce at home to 0.
I think that was Clement's first game, I think.
It was, yeah. It was after then, and that was in late November, if I'm not mistaken. Late November, maybe even, it was definitely in November, I think. But that's when that's when the trigger should have been pulled. But we waited until a couple of days before Christmas, and I don't actually think we picked up another win, did we, between then and by the time that Rowett was sacked? Maybe one. That's why he hung on for Ipswich. The one game that he
it was the Ipswich game that saved his job.
Yeah. So, yeah, and it looks like that he might be one of the. I think off the top of my head, he might be the first manager in EFL in the Championship history to manage 2 clubs and have a relegation on his CV with 2 clubs from one season. And then you're absolutely right again with that the board waited far too long to appoint a successor. It was 4 weeks, nearly touching on 5.
Yeah.
When Des Buckingham was sacked last year, Rowett came in relatively quickly. It was about 7 days after. So you could tell that there was some sort of maybe talks going on behind the scenes. He was headhunted or whatever. This is just me surmising. And the process was done pretty quickly. Whereas this time, it took 5 weeks. After an interview process, we obviously wanted Alan Sheehan for one reason or another. He interviewed. He didn't like what he saw. And we had to wait another week or so to go and get the bloke or the bloke that originally wasn't going to get the job. Now, don't get me wrong. Matt Bloomfield's won me over. And I feel quite confident. And I feel comfortable I think is the right word, with him in charge next season. I think because he's going to have a point to prove after the Frank disaster that was at Luton, he's going to be more determined than ever. And I think that the board for a League One manager at the League One level have made the correct decision. I think that he fits more into the mould of Oxford United, I think, than Gary Rowett ever did. And I know that you have your issues with Gary Rowett, mainly because of not coming over and clapping the fans and a lot of time. I think his attitude, whether it's just, pardon my ignorance, whether it's just that Midlands attitude of stiff upper lip and, generally speaking, in the Midlands, they have much more broader shoulders than we do down south, whether we care to admit it or not. But yeah, in terms of managerial department, that also has been an absolute shambles.
Yeah. I mean, I will take this opportunity to apologise to Matt Bloomfield, because on the podcast, I was very, not disrespectful, but I was, sceptical about the appointment. I was thinking he's not this flashy name. He's been out of work. His time at Luton was a disaster. I've got to massively apologise to Matt Bloomfield, and like you said, he's won me over. And we were just talking about it again before we started rolling. I brought up the table of his first game to the point we're at now. He has overseen 18 games. 18 matches Matt Bloomfield has overseen. We have won 5, drawn 7, lost 6, giving us a point return of 22 points. If the league had started from the point that Matt Bloomfield was appointed, we would be 14th. We'd be, as I mentioned earlier, in next season's playoff system, we'd be closer to the playoffs than we would be relegation. So that's the job that Matt Bloomfield has done. And you said at the time, it's exactly what he did at Luton. Correct me if I'm wrong, they were like on playoff form by the time he got sacked, but he didn't have an extra, those first 5 games. Oxford, it was those 2 draws against Bristol and QPR were, if he picked up them vital points, and we'll talk about it in a minute, there have been a lot of drop points this season where we could have got some real momentum behind us.
Yeah, and now you've reminded me of that, Sam. I'm kind of bricking it that what if history repeats itself? Because at that time, in the last game of the season last year, Luton were outside the playoffs and then got absolutely battered and then fell into they were just a place outside the relegation zone. And then they got absolutely battered at West Brom. What if history repeats itself again for Matthew Bloomfield? Yeah. I was going to pick up on something else that you said, and it's completely gone out of my head, unfortunately.
I get a chance to get it back. You're right in terms of, a lot of people when Bloomfield was appointed said, it's preparation for League One, and at the time I disagreed with that, but at the same time, I was at the moment that Rowett was sacked was saying, give me. I'm just trying to wrap my brain and go for some of the managers we were linked to, but some of those traditional firefighters, I was saying give him a 6-month contract, but Bloomfield, he's got that longer term deal, which means we can roll into next season in League One, hopefully look to make an instant return. Go on, and then if you remember the point, and then we'll go on to kind of where a lot of troubles have come since Bloomfield's been in charge.
So the point that I was going to make was, especially with conversations with a lot of people who I sit around with in the North Stand, I think that obviously we'll be disappointed when it is confirmed and that we are relegated. However, when you compare the first half of the season compared to the second half in terms of the performances on the pitch have been night and day, in that if we were going to go down the way that Gary Rowett was setting us up to play and the performances that we were putting in, I would be a lot more disconnected, not apoplectic, but disappointed, because we didn't really grab the ball by the horns and we weren't playing a way that we know that we can play. And that was frankly horrific to watch on the eye. And we all said at the time when it was inevitable that Rout was going to be sacked, if we're going to go down, we'd rather go down swinging. And I think that is a lot of that has happened under Bloomfield, that if we go down, it's going to be more to do with either our ability or decision making rather than tactical setup and, you know, lack of fight or effort, because you can't deny that there isn't any you can't deny that the players aren't lacking or that there's any effort. Don't get me wrong. We've bitched and whined about it, I think, today at Derby and against Portsmouth. And that's only because we have seen, they've shown us what they can do.
Yeah.
So the overarching point is that if we're going to go down with Bloomfield playing the way that he's playing, and it's front-footed and attacking and direct, and we've been giving it a go, I think that softens the blow a lot more than it would have done if we were going down the way that Leicester City are going down under Rowett.
Yeah, definitely. So just to look at some of the results we think that have kind of cost us, I think starting the season with 3 defeats on the trot, obviously the 1-0 loss to Portsmouth, 3-2 defeat at Hull, and then losing 1-0 at St Andrews. That was, for any side, 3 losses on the bounce to start a campaign is going to be far from ideal. Did redeem ourselves a little bit with picking up points against Coventry and a point against Leicester. Obviously, this was Leicester side at a time that were looking good. And obviously that first win comes against Bristol City on the 21st of September. Looking more recently, like you said, it's the not picking up 3 drop points, I think we said at the time, 4 drop points, I should say, across the Bristol City and QPR home games. There's the really bad performance against Birmingham, which was diabolical. Another really bad performance. I think, Sheffield United and Coventry, I don't think we could have got much more out of those two. Coventry, they were, we know the monster they are. They're now a Premier League side. And we did really well to grab a point there. Sheffield United, we kind of crumbled after Pat Harris gave us the lead. But for me, I'm looking at maybe a little bit Middlesbrough, because the Middlesbrough game was, there was a couple of opportunities where we could have snatched that 3 points. But again, look at where they are in the league. I'm more looking at the games against Stoke, drop points against Charlton and Hull, awful performance against Southampton, awful performance against Norwich, and then obviously, as we said more recently, 2 weeks ago against Portsmouth, that we could have seen that out. We could have been in a better situation than we are right now. And our game management this season has been particularly poor, I think.
Yeah, it has been. I'm looking at it, and the games that I'm more looking at are those games against Portsmouth, Hull, and Charlton. You think there's an extra 6 points there that takes it up to 50, albeit we'd only be 1 point outside the relegation zone, but we'd be looking a lot more chipper, especially if we have a game in hand on Blackburn, who would be sitting on 44 games and 49 points, so we'd be sitting on 50 points. But yeah, it's also the way that at times that Bloomfield has changed tactically within games, going to a back 3/back 5, whatever you want to call it, and just inviting so much pressure on. And especially in instances, I think definitely against West Brom, and the other big one obviously being against Charlton when bringing on Prelates, and there was just no attacking output whatsoever, just inviting pressure on, going almost to a flat back 7 and back 9 as well, and just not coping with the pressure whatsoever. And in instances where Bloomfield has set up a back 3/back 5 and we get absolutely battered by, for example, by Norwich, which was an absolute shit show. It was a disaster. And I think it's fair to say the first half against Stoke as well, it was painful. Even more so the fact that going back to our income is the fact that we brought in a left wing back, and he doesn't look like that he's capable of even playing at left back or left wing back. Sometimes he looks like a small fish in a big pond in Ruskin.
Yeah, I think we mentioned last week that we've had the conversation a couple of times in that we signed a left wing back to play in a back 4 system. which is a bit of an odd recruitment decision. The Norwich game is obviously all down to individual errors, but we've had a lot of individual errors this season as well. We had a couple last year, but this season has been more so. Jamie Cumming, the fall off, I think, to last season has been massive for Jamie. Kieran Brown has been far from his ability. Mikhail Helik, Cameron Brannigan. I mean, yesterday I thought he was a poor. We've had the Mark Harris conversation a couple of times. It's interesting that since Bloomfield has come in, there's been little room for Shemi Poheta or for particularly Sariki Dembele. Two of Rowett's trusted lieutenants have been, in Dembele's case, completely frozen out of the squad. Poheta's had a couple of cameo appearances, but it's been kind of few and far between. For me, like I said, it's the game management has been particularly crap this season. Again, we talked about at the time, the dropping those 2 points to Charlton. Why is Kieran Brown pulled his man? It's a stupid thing to do. Could have won the whole game and all that kind of thing. Just go back through all the previous podcasts, folks, and you'll see us talk about each of those specific games in detail. So, as we prepare for life back in League One, which my worst nightmare is coming true, we're going to be replaced in the division by Lincoln City. And maybe, looking at the League One playoffs, maybe Bolton, maybe Bradford, maybe Stockport, maybe Stevenage.
That's my worst nightmare. We get relegated the same year that Lincoln and Stevenage get promoted. And you think,
depressing.
Yep.
Honestly, Matt Phillips Matt Phillips could be a championship player before Brian de Keersmacher is again, which would be ridiculous.
That is disgusting. How is he even getting on at Stevenage? I've not been keeping up whatsoever. Let me take a look. Hang on, I've got him up at the moment.
I was gonna say, I think he signed a relatively new contract as well. And
he scored 1 goal and 13 appearances, a 2-1 win against Stockport County.
Just trying to see because I know there was. Where's he gone then? I thought Carl Edwards was still at Stevenage, but he doesn't appear to be with them anymore. I'm trying to remember where he's gone now. Anyway, so that's, like I said, us being replaced by Lincoln's depressing, and then if it's Stockport or Bolton or Stevenage, I'm going to have to go into a dark corner for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it sounds mental, but Cardiff got promoted as well. So ideally, you'd want Bolton to get promoted, so it gets another big team out of League One. But if you look at the teams who look like they're coming up from League One, the teams that are coming down from the Championship, and teams that are already there, it's looking tough, Sam. I said last week, I think we could be all right. We could do something. But when I've been deep in it, there's going to be, off the top of my head, 2 teams in parachute payments in Luton and Leicester.
Yeah. There's
going to be teams who aren't afraid to spend grass, one of them being us, and also probably Bradford, Huddersfield, Plymouth. If they can sort their acts out, I'm sure that Reading won't be afraid to spend a fair bit either. Mm-hmm. If the owner, Dara, MK, they're going to spend a fair whack as well. A big whack, by the way. And you got other teams coming up like Bromley. They're going to be a surprise, I think, next season. I'm sure that they're going to be viewed as what Lincoln will be in the Championship. Oh yeah, they'll just go straight back down. Don't expect that whatsoever. They're going to be right up for it. So yeah, it's going to be tough, mate. There's going to be 10 ex-Premier League clubs in that league at least. And if that lot down the road get promoted, I think it's going to be the absolute end of me. And I will have to buy a season ticket at that point.
Well, this is the other point, is that as I think I said it to you as soon as the full-time whistle blew at Derby, that we were saying we're done and all that kind of thing. And some people around me were going, we'll be all right next season. We'll bounce straight back. And I'm saying, we won't. This is Oxford. We don't do things the easy way. I've got a horrible feeling we're going to be stuck in League One for at least 2 years. But also, like you said, I mean, looking at League One at the minute, automatics are Bromley, MK, and Cambridge. MK have spent, they bought League One quality players to play in League Two. That's paid off for them. I'm sure they'll try and recruit a couple of Championship rejects to play in League One to boost their hopes.
And you're forgetting they have the League One specialist in Paul Warne. That man does not fail at getting teams promoted out of League One. So they're gonna. That's if you're doing pre-season investments, you're doing anti-post investments. MK top 6. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Obviously, Salford, Notts County, Scum, and Chesterfield make up the rest of the League Two playoffs. I won't profess to be an expert in League Two matters, but you are our EFL expert. Salford always like to chuck a bit of cash around, don't they, old KR?
Yeah, KR loves a bit of cash chuck around. Only big, strong, fast, powerful wingers. And the spending rules in League One and League Two are very different to the Championship. You have more leniency. So I think I was tuned into a bit of a Leicester podcast this morning, and they seem to be under the impression that they'll be able to, that they're gonna go for it. They're gonna go full Birmingham City, and they'll be able to spend as much as they want, which part of that is true, but they've got a bigger problem in getting 90k a week wages off their books from some of their players. But yeah, it will be interesting, Sam, to see how we compete in that sense with other clubs who are willing to spend a fair amount of grass. Because I have no doubt that we will spend once again, but it's just how far we're willing to go to be able to spend that money, because Grant Ferguson did say if we need to go down, then we'll go down. We'll just get promoted again next season. So that's targets on his back now. It's on the board's back. 100%. I'm sure that Eric will be willing again to write out the checks, but it's on Grant, it's on Tim, and if he's still there, it's on Ed to get it right. And then it will be all on Bloomfield and his staff as to what happens. So let's put it this way, Sam. Not focus on teams that are coming up from League Two, but in terms of teams going down from the Championship, I think that we are probably the best placed, but that doesn't really account for a lot when you've got a team that's going to have parachute payments, and that could get 30,000 in every week if they have a good summer.
Yeah, that's my bigger concern, is because a lot of the bodies at Leicester, I think, like your Winks, like your Skip, I think their contracts are expiring in the summer.
That's the thing, Sam. There hasn't really been a lot of communication. There are some murmurs that there have actually been contract extensions triggered. So they're worried that the likes of Winks, even Fatawu, Hamza Chowdhury, AU, that they're just going to stay because they don't care, but they're getting their 50, 60, 90 grand a week wages. So trying to move them on will be very, very difficult. And their worry is that they're going to try and think that they can just waltz the league because, they're on paper, they're Premier League players in League One.
But yeah, that's the thing, is that, like you say, Leicester, they are going to find the monetary rules, easier to handle, I think, in League One than they did in the Champ. And that's what concerns me is, and like you say, you make up the rest of that of the sides that likes to throw a bit of cash around. That's why I said it's not going to be easy to get out of League One next season. Which is, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's never easy to get out of League One. I mean, we spent 8 years in that division. But next year is particularly tough. I think Luton, I think I've got one more year of parachute payments as well. So there's that to deal with as well.
Just to balance this conversation up, Sam. There have been teams that have gone down to League One from the Championship haven't really found it that easy when you're talking about these big clubs with pedigree and history, and thinking like Sunderland, they were down there for 4 years. Ipswich, been down there for 4 years. Leeds, although that situation was a little bit different, they were down there for about 4 years as well. I think Forest were down there for a few years as well. Portsmouth, again, a different situation, but I think that might be a bit unfair because I think they dropped straight from the Championship down into League Two. But I think that Birmingham City last year were that outlier because they had these such wealthy Americans came in and they were just able to start splashing the cash. But like with what's going on with King Power, whether there are funds there and they're available to splash the cash like they envisage that they can do, as I say, look at Sunderland and Ipswich. It isn't that easy. I remember when I went to Munich to watch England, and I was talking to, I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been some Sunderland fans. When they got relegated, and I was like, "Yeah, welcome to League One. It's grim. It's disgusting. 1 minute you're beating, at that time you're beating Ipswich or Sunderland, and the next week you're getting battered at Fleetwood away. It is an absolutely honking league."
Yeah. Once the season's over, folks, we're going to be doing an end of year pseudo awards, and we're also going to talk about who we think will stay, who we think is likely to be some of the first out the door from Oxford United. So you got that to look forward to in a couple of weeks. But we're at that point in the season where it's quite funny. I think almost the our entire typical show structure kind of goes out the window because we've accepted we're already down. But give us a very quick rundown of Wrexham and mainly Wrexham because we know Sheffield Wednesday are heading down with us and we know the situation they're in. But is there a point where maybe could end the season with a couple of extra points and make it look like not as bad a relegation?
We could do. I mean, let's be honest. We want to beat Wrexham because, it gives us that faint hope of survival. But let's be absolutely honest, Sam, there's one particular player that is on the Wrexham books, and that's the main reason we want to win. Not going to name names, but he also shares the same name as you. And I would never wish violence on anybody, but, him being carried off on a stretcher, I think would probably be a louder sound and a louder cheer than it would be if a ball hit the back of the net. But if we're being serious for a second, Wrexham, I think that I don't think that, again, a lot of people expected them to be where they are, completely outperformed, and you have to tip your hat to Phil Parkinson and some of the business that they've done because we would absolutely do atrocities to be able to have the squad that they have. I said when he was announced that he was being released, Josh Windass, that was an absolute dream of mine to get him, but that was as I say, a fairy tale dream. Ollie Rathbone as well. I think that he's some player, but there is an opportunity to get at them because they're a bit inconsistent, a bit shaky away from home, and my dad actually he's got one of his friends who's a Wrexham fan, and he's going to be in the away end on Tuesday night. And he was saying that they usually play absolutely appallingly against teams who are towards the bottom end of the table. You think a few weeks ago they were 2-0 down to West Brom and managed to get it back to 2-2. So I certainly think that there's an opportunity there because they're going to be just as nervous as we are. They're going to be pushing like hell to get into those top 6 places. And believe me, the media are as well. They would absolutely love it if Wrexham were in the playoffs. But we generally speaking, for some reason or another, we seem to up our game against teams who are up and around the top 8, top 9. So, and I'm sure that the Kassam Stadium is going to be rocking on Tuesday, hopefully.
So I was just looking at the marquee arrival from Wrexham's summer business, which of course is Nathan Broadhead. I was thinking, so like you said, they've got an embarrassment of Rich available to them. Of the 39 games he's been involved, he's only started 20, which I think shows the ridiculous levels that Wrexham have available to them. Which like I say, there's I would do horrible, horrible things to give that those kind of resources to Oxford United. Just fingers crossed for some, let's say, Sam on Sam violence. Is the hope. But like you say, these last 3 games, let's enjoy our time back in the championship, and hopefully the players will actually turn up this time, because we spoke about it before we started rolling on this pod that mate of mine, Rowan, said that, you know, the fans turned up on Saturday, the players did not in that first half. Not to take away from Derby, they played us off the park. They were much better. You could tell there around the playoff picture, but our players didn't turn up. Our players looked really, really poor, and it's their job to make apologies to the fan base, even if it's, you know, the chances of staying in the championship are, I think, down to single digits. But thank you for watching this rather lengthy week episode of Walking the Line Road, folks. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Of course, please do also like and subscribe. Massively helps out in the algorithm. And like I say, a follow on Connor and I's respective socials would also massively be appreciated to slightly boost our spirit going into this week. Thankfully, there are. I don't work with any scum or ding fans, but I'm afraid our friend Connor might have to interact with a couple of Bristol people in the next week. So all good thoughts to him. Like I said, thanks so much for watching, folks, and we'll see you next week for a review of course, the Wrexham and Sheffield Wednesday games. We count down our time in the division.